They say Wall Street was born in New York, shaped by modern minds and mastered by the West. But what if I told you that the very blueprint of this trillion-dollar empire was crafted 1,000 years ago by Muslims? What if the secret to the West's wealth was borrowed, no, inherited from the forgotten brilliance of Islamic civilization? This isn't a history lesson, it's a revelation, a truth buried under centuries of silence. Today, we peel back the layers of time and expose the shocking reality. The systems the world praises were once ours, and unless we reclaim them, we'll keep watching others rise on foundations we laid. So don't blink, don't skip, and don't click away, because what you're about to hear will change how you see history and your future. Long before Wall Street's rise or the birth of modern capitalism, Muslim civilizations had already introduced the core financial principle that underpins venture capital today: risk sharing. Known in Islamic finance as mudaraba and musharaka, these partnerships were revolutionary concepts rooted in trust, equity, and shared accountability. In a mudaraba agreement, one party provided the capital while the other offered labor and expertise. Profits were split according to pre-agreed ratios, and losses were borne solely by the capital provider unless negligence occurred. This created a system of mutual benefit where neither side could exploit the other, and it encouraged innovation by giving entrepreneurs access to funding without the crushing burden of interest. Musharaka, on the other hand, was a joint venture where all parties contributed capital and shared profits and losses proportionally. It promoted cooperation and aligned incentives, reducing the greed and inequality often found in today's corporate structures. These mechanisms allowed trade and commerce to flourish across the Muslim world, from the markets of Baghdad and Cairo to the ports of Zanzibar and Andalusia. Merchants weren't trapped in debt. They had the freedom to take calculated risks, backed by a system that believed in partnership rather than exploitation. This was not just a financial tool. It was a worldview, a belief that wealth should be earned through effort, honesty, and collaboration. Islamic scholars and jurists laid down detailed regulations ensuring fairness in contracts, transparency in dealings, and accountability in partnerships. These financial contracts became so robust that they formed the economic engine of a civilization stretching from West Africa to Southeast Asia. And what's more astonishing is how similar these models are to what we now see in Silicon Valley venture funds and startup ecosystems. The idea of investors providing seed capital in exchange for a share of profits, with the risk of total loss if the business fails, is fundamentally a repackaged form of mudaraba. It didn't begin on Wall Street. It began in the mosques, markets, and courts of the Islamic Golden Age. But over time, Muslims drifted away from these ethical, productive models, while others took the ideas, changed the labels, and built empires. The truth is painful because it reveals how deeply the Muslim world has forgotten its own financial legacy. A legacy that didn't just match the modern world's tools, but often did it better, fairer, and centuries earlier. The Waqf system was one of the most powerful economic engines in the Islamic world, functioning as a cornerstone of sustainable wealth development for centuries. At its heart, Waqf was an endowment made by a Muslim for religious, educational, or charitable purposes, and once declared, it could never be sold, inherited, or gifted again. This unique mechanism protected wealth from being dissolved or monopolized and ensured it continued to serve the public good for generations. Wealthy individuals would donate properties, farms, markets, wells, schools, libraries, and even hospitals to a waqf, placing them under legal and spiritual protection. The income generated from these assets would be used to fund public services without relying on state coffers or oppressive taxation. This decentralized system of social welfare created an economic safety net that empowered communities, uplifted the poor, and made knowledge accessible to all. In practice, the Waqf system created job opportunities, stimulated local economies, and prevented wealth from accumulating in the hands of a few. Schools funded through Waqf taught philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and mathematics, while hospitals provided free treatment to rich and poor alike. Travelers found shelter in Waqf guest houses, and scholars thrived in Waqf-endowed institutions. This system allowed wealth to remain in circulation, not hoarded in vaults or siphoned into offshore accounts. In many ways, it served as an early model of decentralized, socially conscious capitalism, one where profit was not the only measure of success, but impact and service were equally vital. Even Western historians have acknowledged that Waqf institutions were among the most advanced systems of social enterprise in medieval history. They offered long-term solutions to economic disparity and were rooted in Islamic values of justice, charity, and communal responsibility. What makes the Waqf even more impressive is how it required no government oversight. It was a voluntary system driven by moral and spiritual obligation, not state enforcement. Today, ideas like nonprofit trusts and charitable foundations echo the Waqf model, yet the Muslim world rarely recognizes that it pioneered this path. The painful truth is that many Muslims have abandoned the Waqf philosophy, focusing instead on short-term gain, personal accumulation, and imitation of Western structures that often lack the ethical backbone of the original system. The very mechanism that once built thriving civilizations now lies dormant, while others refine and replicate it under different names and with global influence. Muslim trade routes during the Islamic Golden Age were not just highways of goods. They were veins through which the lifeblood of knowledge, culture, and finance flowed across continents. From the Silk Road stretching across Central Asia to the vast maritime routes of the Indian Ocean, Muslim merchants created a global network that connected the East and West centuries before modern globalization. These routes were more than commercial. They were structured, secure, and supported by robust legal and ethical frameworks that promoted trust, fairness, and transparency. Contracts were drawn, credit systems were used, and promissory notes were exchanged with a level of sophistication that stunned later European observers. These trade practices didn't just boost economies, they forged relationships, built cities, and seeded entire industry. One of the defining features of these trade routes was the concept of aman, or safety for all travelers, regardless of faith or background. Muslim empires understood that a successful economy could not thrive in fear, so they invested heavily in protecting traders, building caravanserais for rest, and maintaining road safety. These decisions weren't just about economics. They were rooted in Islamic values that promoted justice and prosperity for all. Markets from Baghdad to Timbuktu to Granada became melting pots of ideas, where African gold met Chinese silk, where Indian spices were traded for Arabian horses, and where traders from Europe learned the fundamentals of trade financing long before their own systems matured. But what made these routes revolutionary was the level of standardization they introduced. Weights, measures, trade laws, and currency exchange protocols were regulated and consisted across vast territories: air, grounds and air, water and mud. Trade laws and currency exchange protocols were regulated and consisted across vast territory. This is why European merchants and governments studied Islamic trade practices, slowly absorbing their techniques into what would eventually become modern finance. The rise of institutions like the bourse and even the very concept of a bank check can trace their inspirations back to Muslim trading systems. Yet today, few Muslims know this history and fewer still honor or revive it. The wealth-building genius of our ancestors was not luck. It was built on trust, ethics, innovation, and a belief in fair exchange. Now, ironically, those same Western systems that once looked east for inspiration are thriving, while many in the Muslim world have forgotten the blueprint that once made them global economic leaders. Early Muslim scholars didn't just contribute to financial thought. They laid the intellectual foundation for entire economic philosophies that would later be adopted and adapted by the West. Long before Adam Smith or Karl Marx ever wrote about economics, Islamic thinkers like Al-Ghazali, Ibn Khaldun, and Al-Mawardi were analyzing wealth, trade, taxation, labor, and ethics through a deeply moral and systematic lens. They recognized that economics was not a separate science. It was part of the moral and spiritual health of a society. Their works examined not just how money flowed, but how that flow impacted justice, equity, and societal well-being. They believed that any financial system divorced from ethical responsibility would eventually collapse under its own weight. This kind of insight wasn't philosophical fluff. It was practical guidance used to shape policy, manage empires, and build institutions. Ibn Khaldun, in particular, is often called the father of sociology and economics because of his cyclical theory of civilizations and his deep understanding of supply, demand, labor value, and taxation. His theories on how excessive taxation weakens a state, how luxury leads to decline, and how economic vitality is. These ideas predate Western classical economic theories by hundreds of years, yet Western academia often presents them as if they were born in Europe. Meanwhile, Muslim education systems today rarely engage with these intellectual giants beyond superficial references, robbing new generations of a powerful legacy that fused spirituality with systemic economic thought. Al-Ghazali wrote about the dangers of hoarding wealth and the ethical responsibilities of merchants. He argued that profit was not inherently evil, but it must be balanced with service, honesty, and intention. His work bridged the worlds of business and spirituality in a way that modern corporate ethics courses still struggle to achieve. Al-Mawardi discussed public finance, state budgets, and wealth distribution in ways that rival modern policy think tanks. These scholars created models of wealth management that emphasized both personal growth and public benefit, and their work influenced centuries of policymaking in the Islamic world. Yet today, their writings gather dust while the modern Muslim world often looks outward for answers it once had. Western economists quietly reference their frameworks, rename their principles, and integrate their insights into global policy. Meanwhile, Muslims are told to catch up with systems that were once inspired by their own scholars, forgetting the painful truth that what the world now calls innovative was once called Islamic thinking. The influence of Muslim economic models on the development of early European financial institutions is one of history's most overlooked truths. Long before the rise of modern banking in Renaissance Europe, Muslim civilizations had already developed sophisticated systems of credit, deposits, currency exchange, and investment partnerships. Concepts like the mudarabah, profit sharing, and mudarabaha, cost plus financing, provided practical, ethical frameworks that allowed for commerce without exploitation. These systems weren't just theoretical. They were institutionalized in the marketplaces of Cairo, Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba. When European merchants and scholars encountered these practices through trade, conquest, and translation movements, they didn't just admire them, They adapted them, reformulated them, and integrated them into the emerging capitalist architecture of the West. The word check itself is derived from the Arabic sak, a financial instrument used by Muslim traders to avoid carrying large sums of money across dangerous trade routes. These checks could be cashed thousands of miles away, protected by a trust network grounded in honor and law. European banking houses later mirrored this practice, forming the basis for what would become international banking. The very architecture of double-entry bookkeeping, often credited to the Italian merchants of the Renaissance, finds early parallels in Muslim accounting systems that demanded precise, accountable financial records rooted in Quranic mandates for honesty and transparency. Muslim financial ethics, based on principles like the prohibition of riba, ushuri, and the obligation of zakat, charity, introduced a moral filter on economic activity that was revolutionary. It sought to balance wealth creation with social responsibility, ensuring that money served people and not the other way around. These ideas weren't just tolerated by early Western thinkers, they were studied and absorbed during periods of heavy interaction with the Muslim world, especially in places like Sicily and Andalusia, where Islamic and Christian societies coexisted and exchanged ideas. But as Europe industrialized and secularized its financial systems, it retained many of these early Muslim innovations while stripping them of their ethical anchors. What remained was a machine of finance without the soul that once guided it. Ironically, Muslims today often admire Western financial systems without realizing they're looking at a mirror that reflects their own forgotten heritage. The painful truth is that the pillars of modern banking and investment were not born in Wall Street. They were shaped by minds in the Muslim world who understood that wealth without ethics leads to injustice, and that true prosperity must serve both individual ambition and collective good. The tragedy of modern Muslim economic decline is not just about lost wealth, it's about the abandonment of a mindset that once dominated the world. America and a mindset that once dominated the world. 1,000 years ago, Muslim civilizations led global trade routes, pioneered financial instruments, and set standards and commercial ethics that were studied far beyond their borders. They understood that wealth was not merely material, it was spiritual, social, and intellectual. The Muslim merchant was not just a businessman, he was a moral agent, a custodian of justice, and a pillar of community welfare. Today, that identity has eroded under the weight of external influence and internal forgetfulness. Many Muslim majority countries now grapple with broken financial systems, high dependency on interest-based institutions, widespread inequality, and a detachment from their own intellectual and ethical foundations. Western systems, despite being modeled on early Islamic principles, are now seen as the gold standard, while Islamic finance is often relegated to niche markets or misunderstood as simply avoiding interest. This reductionist view ignores the rich, holistic philosophy that once governed Islamic economic thought. Muslims have stopped telling their own story and started copying versions of wealth building that ignore ethics, community, and purpose. This shift has created societies where wealth exists but doesn't circulate, where charity is ritualized but not transformative, and where youth pursue success without the spiritual compass that once defined Muslim excellence. Generations are growing up with little or no exposure to the economic brilliance of their ancestors. School curricula rarely mention the contributions of Muslim scholars to finance, trade, and economic justice. Mosques and community centers often speak about charity, but remain silent on entrepreneurship and wealth strategy. The painful truth is that Muslims have not just been left behind, they have stopped walking the path they themselves carved. And in that vacuum, others have picked up the pieces, rebranded them, and now teach the world how to build wealth without ever giving credit to the civilization that laid the groundwork. What makes this decline more painful is that the tools for revival still exist. The principles are not lost, they are simply neglected. The teachings remain in old books, waiting to be reawakened by new minds. But until Muslims reclaim their narrative and reframe their relationship with money, ethics, and purpose, they will continue to consume systems they once authored and watch others profit from a legacy they no longer recognize as their own. The truth is undeniable, even if it's painful. The financial systems that shape our world today didn't emerge from a vacuum. They carry the fingerprints of Muslim scholars, traders, and thinkers who, 1,000 years ago, laid down the foundations of what we now call Wall Street. But somewhere along the way, we stopped walking in our own footsteps. We forgot the principles, ignored the ethics, and traded legacy for imitation. Today, the world profits from our ideas while we struggle with systems we didn't design. This isn't just history, it's a wake-up call. If Muslims are ever to rise again, not just spiritually, but economically, it will begin by remembering who we were, reclaiming what we built, and rebuilding with faith, knowledge, and purpose. The blueprint is already in our hands. We just need the courage to use it. This was Temenya. Thank you for watching and giving your time to truth that's long been buried. May you carry this message forward with clarity, conviction, and courage. Good luck on your journey, not just to success, but to rediscovering the wealth of wisdom that was always yours. Good luck, and to all your kids in mind, to the best of you, to the well, and to the best of you, to the well. Good luck on your special time of post-pause.